Welter Amida says, what are we doing on time? Oh, we're doing fine. Revolutionary War united citizens because we decided to become our own country and repel a foreign government. The Civil War divided citizens. World War I and II brought us back together again. If things get so bad that we have to fight a revolution against our own government that is made up of people who live and have families among us, how do we reconcile the people who leaned towards statism and those who fought to liberate the country from that philosophy? Any ideas on how to reconcile the American people after such an event, or do we need another world war? Well, it's kind of close to the cheery, happy stuff we were talking in the beginning. I have two things on that I want to kind of cover. The first thing that we forget is during the Revolutionary War, the majority of the citizens were on the side of the king. At least it started that way. They were scared, and they were loyal, and so the thing that I admire most about this country, I think the single thing I admire most, if I had to pick one thing, would be the difference between our revolution and the French Revolution. The French Revolution was nothing but oceans of blood, buckets of murder. That's all it was, just murder. It was just murder, envy, revenge, resentment, execution, murder. And when all of the targets have been murdered, like always with these collectivists, they start to murder their own. And they just murdered their own until there's nobody left to murder. Murder, murder, murder. That's the French Revolution. The American Revolution fought a war that went on for years and years and years here in America. And when it was over, we basically said, okay. Nobody was strung up. We didn't string up all the Tories, and they were huge numbers, probably the majority of the population. We didn't just go into the cities and say, you could have fought with us, and you fought against us, or you didn't help us, and therefore you're going to swing. No, we just said, okay, well, we've got the country now, we've got the colonies, so this is the new flag. If you want to stay, stay, and be a part of it. If you don't, go to Canada. You can stick with your king. It's a profound thing. It really is. It's such a beautiful thing. And John Adams defending British soldiers and winning in court, So I like to think that that is the tone that we would take. And frankly, it is the tone that we would take. It's not the tone that they would take. That's the other thing. This is the advantage of this case selection honor kind of thing. If the American founding fathers lost the war, they would have swung. They would have all hanged. But if they won the war, it didn't mean the British generals and governors were going to swing. They didn't escape. There's any number of British officials who fell into the hands of the victorious American armies. They didn't swing. We didn't execute them, And the same would be true today. If that comes to that and we have to fight and win, if we win, we'll be magnanimous because we're magnanimous people, because we don't think they're evil. We just think they're stupid. We just think they're wrong. We just think the other side is wrong. We don't think they're evil. We don't hate them. We don't think they're not people. We hate what they do, but we just think they're wrong. If they win, we're going to go because that's what collectivists do. They murder people. You just can't believe the limits there is no limit to the murder that these collectivists will do for their heaven on earth, because if things aren't working out, it has to be somebody's fault, right? Can't be the theory, because if it's the theory, that's their religion gone. So somebody has to pay. So there's that. And then there was another thought I had, and then this other thought is a little more serious. The thought is, if this forget economic collapse, it's a societal collapse, a collapse of law. Look, if the people who are at the top of the food chain, if the president, the secretary of state, the attorney general do not enforce the law, then why should little people enforce the law? Why should they obey the law? There's no reason to. It all comes from the top. That's what civilization is. It's a compact. It's an agreement. It's a contract. We agree to obey the law. You agree to obey the law. Therefore, we'll allow you some power over us. If this lawlessness of this president and this former secretary of state and all the rest of it, it can't continue. It just can't. So the tougher question is, if this thing does come down and you have societies that are surviving out there, and I say societies, I mean something like little city-states or something, or maybe they're entire republics, maybe the Northern Idaho Republic and the West Texas Republic, or whatever. These can communicate with each other, cooperate with each other, but what do you do with the refugees? What do you do with the huge, huge, huge numbers of people who are going to be seeking food and asylum in the lifeboat? If there's not enough food for them, then they simply have to be turned away, because otherwise the argument we're making now doesn't make any sense. If America were limitless in size and limitless in money and limitless in the degree that the culture wouldn't be changed or reversed anyway, because all the immigrants changed the culture, but nothing until now has reversed the culture, has destroyed the culture. Then you could make the case that bring them in. But it's not limitless. And you are left with a lifeboat. You're left with a lifeboat. That's what America is. That's why you cannot open the doors to immigration. That's why you can't have a no borders policy, an open world policy. You cannot do it. The way to think about this is it's the Titanic, right? The West are the lifeboats. And the ocean liner is going down. Now, the thing that most people don't realize is that the ocean liner's always been going down. The lifeboats are the flukes. They're not the natural state of man is to be on the sinking ocean liner. The reason people are swimming for the lifeboats is because it's the first time in history that there's been something like a lifeboat. But put that aside for a second. Here we are in the lifeboat where things are working and there's discipline and we're rowing and we're taking care of the sick and we're rationing medicine and all this other stuff. And now you got people in the water. And you can even make the case there's no difference from those people. Those people are as morally sound as the people on the lifeboat. That's fine. You got 2,000 people in the water and you got 70 people on a lifeboat. Now, one of two things is going to happen. You can either take as many people as the lifeboat will stay afloat with. And that, I think, is probably a moral good. In other words, I think on the Titanic, off the top of my head, that the boats were limited to 50 people. It's off the top of my head. And some of them sailed away with 12, 22 of the 50 seats available. The first ones off were not anything like loaded to capacity. But when they got in the water, they were having 50 people on it. And when you got to the ropes that were around the side and all the people you could put in on the extra space, you probably get 70 or 80 in a lifeboat meant to hold 50. Now, that lifeboat will not stay afloat in heavy seas, but it was glass calm that night, and they knew aid was coming. So you can take the capacity of the boat and some as an act of mercy. But you can't put 2,000 people into a lifeboat that will hold 50 people. And the stark, cold reality of the world is that if you try to put those 2,000 people onto that lifeboat, then nobody survives the sinking. No one. Everybody dies. That's the situation we're in. And so what we should be talking about is not whether or not we should be letting everybody in the world into Europe and North America. What we should be talking about is what do these people have to do to turn their miserable crap hole countries into Europe and North America? In other words, what do we have to do to stop their ship from sinking? Because we do not have the room for them. We do not. It's not just a question of living space. I live in California, for God's sakes. And in order for me, when I leave Los Angeles and I start heading east in a 737, climbing through 10,000 feet up to 30,000 feet, the first half an hour of the trip, and 15 minutes of that is heading out over the Pacific and turning around. So the first 15 minutes of the journey east is over Los Angeles and Palm Springs. And then for an hour and a half, there's nothing but desert. Until you get to the Rockies. There's nothing but desert. There's plenty of room here. There's plenty of room for people to be here. It's not a question of whether or not there's room. The question is, if you're going to give these people benefits, then more and more people are getting into the cart and fewer people are pushing or pulling it. So there's that issue. And if these people are determined to come and not adapt and become part of the culture the way it was with the melting pot, but are determined to destroy the culture, then it's just plain suicide. It's like letting people with axes and knives and onto your boat, and as they're climbing onto the boat, they're saying, we're going to kill you, and we're determined to kill you. We're not going to row. We're going to murder you all, then throw you overboard. Let us in. Not going to do it. I don't have a death wish. By the way, I was watching, before I did the Skype test today, I was watching one of Stefan's videos, and I'd never seen him before. I didn't know who he was before this afternoon. And he was talking with a guy from Germany about this invasion. And I heard this German guy say something that genuinely took the breath away from me. This German guy was talking about these immigrants, and he was talking about the reaction of other Germans to the immigrants and how conflicted they were, because on one hand, they're scared, and they're right to be scared. On one hand, they see the destruction of their civilization, not 20 years off, but 20 weeks off. They see this rioting, this rampaging, this smashing of cars, this Allahu Akbar, this tying up streets that they can worship on the streets 5 times a day. They see all of it out their windows, and they're terrified and they want to stop it. But this is what this guy said that just really blew me away. Was he said, but the thing with us Germans is, on some level, we're more afraid of ourselves. You know, Germany's dealt with their past in a way that Japan really hasn't, even to this day. And Germany's post-war reaction to Nazism is one of the most morally sound and morally admirable things I've ever seen in human history. Especially since the people that were doing it really, in many cases, didn't bear any of the guilt. They literally were the children of the people that did this, and you're not responsible for your sins of your father. And what Germany did in terms of exposing what actually happened, there was a period of 10 years there right after the war where nobody said boo about this whole death camp thing. But once somebody broke through that wall, the reaction of the German people to their own background, to their own history, I think has been exemplary, and to the degree that they face it, they acknowledge it, they admit it, they own it, and they're determined to do something about it. But to hear this relatively young German say, certainly much younger than could have possibly been a National Socialist, he said, we start thinking about solutions like this and we start thinking that we're National Socialists. In other words, the gray area has gone out of German culture. The Germans right now, based on what this guy said, but it makes perfect sense to me, and it makes perfect sense all across the board. I think the bind, the Scylla and Charybdis that Germans are in right now, this rock and a hard place thing, is we either fight back, in which case we're Nazis again, which is intolerable, or we let them kill us. That's their world. And that's the world that the left is trying to foist on us too, by the way. That's what they're trying to say to Americans. It's a little tougher sell with Americans. But we either racist murderers, or we go willingly to our destruction. Those are the choices that we're presented with here, because we're not allowed to believe in ourselves. There's no vigor in our civilization anymore. Vigor is being bled out, and as the vigor falls quickly, the civilization, the sea comes down more slowly, but still following the belief in the civilization. The belief falls rapidly, and then the civilization falls as a result of lack of belief in it. So to hear a German say that, and to hear the pain in his voice, you could tell he was like choked up. He says, we're more afraid of ourselves than we are of these people. That just stirs all kinds of interesting and very deep thoughts. And the first one is the fact that you're able to ask that question immunizes you in most cases against what you're afraid of. If you are basically saying, I'm terrified about the brutality of the result, don't you understand that's the antithesis of what the National Socialists were? That's the antithesis of National Socialism, to be concerned about the brutality of your response. The National Socialists were about the brutality. Brutality and terror were their tools. It wasn't like an accident. This was the conscious decision of all of the Nazi leadership. It's the whole reason the SA existed in the first place, to put 3 or 4 million people eventually, just brown-shirted thugs, on the street to intimidate the opposition, to bully people up and rough up Jews and rough up opposition. And then eventually, when they had to be excommunicated and have that head cut off, then you reduce the number down to a much smaller group of much more ruthless, terrorizing Gestapo SS type guys. When you hear the Germans say that if we fight them back, we're concerned that we're going to turn into the Gestapo and the SS, that's an indication that they're not going to turn into the Gestapo and the SS. And they're in a terrible philosophical bind that they've put themselves into. I think it's a false dichotomy. I think the German people not only have an opportunity, but they have an obligation to fight for their German culture. And that means expelling these people that are there to destroy it. And I don't have any problem with expelling that. And if these people start opening fire on our citizens and our police force, then we need to open fire back. And if we kill a bunch of them, then I don't have any problem with that either. It's an armed invasion in that case. You just simply expel them. You let them in, escort them to the door. And you let them in because you thought they'd behave themselves. They didn't. They came to your dinner party and they just basically urinated on the floor in front of everybody. Then they can be escorted to the door and shown the ropes, and they're back out on the street where they came from. There's nothing unethical or immoral about that whatsoever. It was an act of charity and generosity that was repaid with barbarism, rape, violence, murder, and destruction of property. Okay, we made a mistake. Back you go. And we're obviously going to have to build a wall now to keep you out. Where's the ethical harm in that? And we do not have an obligation to take in the entire world. We fought for these privileges. We fought for them. We paid for them. We paid for them in terms of work. We worked our asses off to build this society. We still work our asses off. We're incredibly hardworking, energetic, inventive, creative people. We have been our entire history. And huge numbers of Americans have died to protect these things. And what we're doing is basically taking that hard work and that effort and that sacrifice and giving it to people who are unwilling to do it on their own. And since they're unwilling to pay for it on their own, they don't appreciate it. They think it's just a gift. They think it's just a corrupt gift for that matter. And since they don't have to pay for it, they don't value it. They need to go back to their countries and have their own revolutions and have their own uprisings and have their own losses and have their own heroes and turn those tyrannies into freedoms on their own. And if they're not willing to do it, then they don't deserve it. And we're not going to just give it to them. We can't give it to them. That's my entire point. By giving it to them, it loses all the value. The reason that we fight for our freedoms is because we've paid a very high price for them and they have value to us. We fight out there today to protect our freedoms because our fathers fought for our freedoms and our grandfathers fought and died for our freedoms and our great-great-grandfathers fought and died for our freedoms. And we would like someday to be able to enter the halls of our fathers in whose mighty company we will no longer be ashamed. And it's just that simple. And when these guys, these savages come into Europe and start destroying everything that those Europeans had worked for over centuries to create this modern civilization, when these barbarians come in there and first thing they do is start destroying it and telling them how they're going to destroy it and they're going to take it over and they're going to trash everything. And no, we showed you an act of mercy. We obviously showed mercy to the wrong people. Out. Well, we're not going to go out. Oh, you are going to go out. Well, we're going to fight you if you try and throw us out. That's your decision, not ours. We just wanted to throw you out. We have a right to throw you out. And since you're not going to go accordingly, then okay. That's not going to happen here. That kind of rampaging lawlessness is not going to happen here. But the reason I lose sleep at night and the reason I have such a hard time dealing with the world is because I know for a certain fact, I know for an absolute certain moral fact, that if I am in my balcony in my apartment and I look down on the street and I see a group of 12 men raping a woman, it doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter if they're Muslim immigrants. It doesn't matter if they're skinheads. It doesn't matter if they're Black Panthers or Crips from the inner city. It doesn't matter. If I look down from my balcony and I watch in front of my eyes in real time a group of men raping an innocent woman who's screaming for help, and I reach into my closet and I remove my AR-15 with my 5-power scope, and I drop 2 of those guys and the rest of them run away, the police will come and they will arrest me. That's America today. They will arrest me in California. I don't know if that's true in Texas, but it's true here. They won't come after those guys. Rapes happen every day in Los Angeles. They're not going to worry about those guys. They're going to come after me because that example has to be stopped. And so these are the kind of moral calculations I have to make living in California now. I have to make these calculations now so that I don't have to make them in real time. This is what conservatives do and K competitors do. We stress ourselves early so we know what to do when the stress really happens. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I'm quite convinced that will never happen to me, that scenario I've just described is not going to happen. But it's not impossible. And as these societal norms and law-abidingness goes away from the top down, as it becomes clear that the police will not prosecute the criminals, but they will prosecute the homeowners and the victims and the people who are trying to defend themselves, then that nightmare scenario gets more likely, not less likely. And so now we have to find out what they're going to do. And then, I mean, in America today, in California, I should say, not in America, in California today, if that happened to me tonight and I watched it happen, I've decided what I would do. I've decided what I would do. If I saw that happening, a group of 12 guys, 2 guys, 1 guy, whatever, I'd yell at him. I'll say I'm calling the cops. If he didn't stop, if they kept at it, I would put a couple rounds within 5 or 6 feet of them because I can fire with that kind of precision. And that almost certainly would scare them away. And that would get me to jail for the night, but that'd probably be the end of it. I'd probably be prosecuted for some kind of felony, but that would be the end of it. That woman would still be alive. But if they didn't stop, then I'd shoot them. And I would risk the court case because I would be the kind of witness that maybe they, or defendant that they may not want to be messing with. I would then risk the court case because my feeling is, better to be tried by 12 men than carried by 6. That doesn't got anything to do with me. I can just sit there and turn up the TV so I don't hear her screaming anymore, but that's not something I can live with. So yeah, I'd fire a couple rounds and they would disperse, and if they didn't, I'd put a couple rounds into them, and then the rest of them would disperse, and I'd keep firing until they did disperse. And that woman would be alive, and I would be alive. I may be in prison, but they'd have to convict me. And even though California is so upside down, and even though they'd make a major effort, I still think the fundamental decency and common sense of people, even in California, to say, yeah, I made a decision to shoot the rapist to save the person who was being raped. You going to throw me in jail for that? Let me know. But that's what it is out here, and if you think I'm exaggerating it, I'm not. You open fire to defend a person's life, or certainly their property, and they will not come after the criminals. They'll come after you. And the world, it's a statement I'm using a lot now, and I really like it, and I'm going to use it a lot. It's like, if you turn the world upside down long enough and shake it, parts are going to start to come loose. And that's what's happening. The world is upside down. The Justice Department prosecutes the innocent, and they let the guilty go because they want political power. We all know how this works. Same thing in Europe. If a person goes to jail after his house has been broken into 7 times because he stabs a guy in the leg because he didn't want to be assaulted and stolen from 8 times, and that man goes to jail and the thief gets a settlement and benefits from the government, then the world is upside down, and it can't stay upside down long enough without big pieces coming loose, and that's what we're seeing right now. 2 to go.